Okay, we'll get the show on the road. My name is Matt Taylor. I'm your area director, and I'm going to chair tonight's session. Thanks very much for coming. This is the second open house we've had, and the focus of tonight's discussion is really on the logistics of the decision that you're about to make. You looking for me?
A little closer.
Okay. So that's the focus of tonight's discussion. We are going to have a brief high-level review of the engineering components and the financial components. But again, I really want to make sure you understand the logistics of the vote that you're going to be making. So that's what tonight's presentation is going to focus on. We can talk later if we need a third open house. It's not something I'm rabidly enthusiastic about, but if it's necessary, we'll do that a couple of weeks before the decision.
Can I just ask you how you're advising people of this meeting? Because many people I've talked to in Lakeshore Highlands have no idea this meeting went on. We had no idea there was a meeting before. There's a group in Heritage Hills that calls themselves the Association. It's not a legal group. It's a bunch of people who got together. They're running the show. Why don't we in Lakeshore Highlands get to know about the meetings? That's the problem. I talked to some people who would have been here tonight, except they made other plans because they had no idea there was a meeting going on. Legally, shouldn't we all be notified? Shouldn't there be something to our house, either door to door or something? If you look at the Small Governments Act, it states we should be, and we're not.
Point taken. Thanks for letting us know. We'll do a better job of trying to communicate more fairly. Back on track. We're clear on what the purpose of tonight's meeting is. If you have questions, and I'm sure you will, and that's what we really do want to hear about, but I'd like to get through the presentation. May actually be answered by if you just wait a few minutes for later on in the individual's presentation. Okay, so we're going to have two presentations tonight. One high-level summary again of the engineering and the financial issues, and second, where we really want to focus the discussion, is on the logistics of the vote. Before we get started on those, I'm going to invite our Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Jim Zaffino, to make a few welcoming comments from the RDOS.
The director gave me 58 minutes, so I've got lots to say. So as the director stated, my name is Jim Zaffino. I am the Chief Administrative Officer for the Regional District for about a year and 2 months now. All I really want to say is today we spent most of the day as staff looking at strategic priorities, which we're going to be taking to the board to make an official policy. And in the strategic priorities, you are one of the major priorities. So the staff is looking at giving all the information that is available. We've got a managing director here that for the utilities department that is here to answer your questions. We also have staff from the utilities department that has been a major part of this looking at the costs, etc. I just want to say you have our support, and based on the earlier comment about more information to you, we'll see what else we can do. One of the ways that we do send out information is Voyant Alert. So if you're not signed up to Voyant Alert, I highly recommend it because you would then know about all these meetings. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, first up, we've got Mr. Alan Fillion, who is the Managing Director for Utilities and Engineering Work within the RDOS.
Thank you. Great to see a number of you out here tonight. Hopefully you'll find the information tonight helpful. We have a few staff here. My name is Alan Fillion, Managing Director, Development and Infrastructure. I'm new to the regional district, just about to hit the 3-month mark, so I might not have all the answers yet, but we have a great team here tonight to help support and answer your questions and even beyond tonight. So if you go home and you're think of some other questions, please reach out and we're happy to help. A lot of great work was done by Encora Engineering last year to provide the information necessary for the process. The information in the next few slides I will again provide a summary of that. thank you for bearing with us here as we work through this.
Those forms to apply for scrutineer will be on our Regional Connections website next week. We can appoint one person in favor of the question and one against. So we have two questions because we have two service areas here. So we expect that we will be appointing two scrutineers for, two scrutineers against, both at the advanced voting and at the regular voting. So there's plenty of opportunities if you're interested in applying to be a scrutineer. A scrutineer sits and observes. They don't participate. They don't talk to the voters. They are observing to make sure that everything is on the up and up. They don't get to touch a ballot. So sometimes, when we go through the list of who's qualified to vote, we say, and not disqualified from voting under Local Government Act or any other enactment. And people say, well, what would disqualify me from voting? So obviously this list doesn't apply to most people, but it includes if you haven't completed a sentence for an indictable offense, unless you're on probation or parole, if you are involuntarily confined to a psychiatric institution because of being acquitted or found not criminally responsible for an offense on account of a mental disorder, or you've contravened a section 161(3) of the Local Government Act. And that specifically speaks to accepting an inducement to vote. Needless to say, I'm confident that none of these apply to any of you. However, if you want to know what would disqualify you, that is the list. So I'm open to any questions with respect to the voting. We do have an email address that you can use if you wish to email us, and that is elections@rdos.bc.ca. I have my phone number listed here. I have business cards over there. And our RDOS Regional Connections page also has an opportunity for you to click on a link and submit a question that way that comes into the office. We would answer and we'll get back to you on that. We've built a list of frequently asked questions, and I believe that is already posted on our RDOS Regional Connections page. So that being said, I believe the floor is going to be open for questions.
Could you just detail a little bit about what the questions are, a specific vote?
The province will have to accept our question, and I'm sorry, I don't have that actual question here. It is something like, are you in favor of the regional district adopting bylaw number 3068, which that one is I believe it's the Vintage Views Wastewater Service Establishment bylaw to create the service and to borrow, and I don't have that dollar figure, and and this is a very important part. Some of you are going to be voting twice. You're going to receive two ballots. If you are in both service areas, you're going to receive two separate ballots. You may say yes on one and no on the other, no on both, yes on both. That's going to be up to you. And others will only receive one. So if you are in the service area as defined, you're an eligible elector, then you will get a ballot for that service area. So as you can see, one service area is bigger than the other. Some of you are in both and some of you are only in one. So back to that question. So you will be asked, are you in favor of the RDOS adopting bylaw number 3068 to create the Vintage Views wastewater service and borrow the dollar value? And the other question is, are you in favor of the RDOS adopting bylaw number 3072, I think, to establish Lakeshore Waterworks as a service of the RDOS and borrow that amount of money? Those questions will be on Regional Connections because we've submitted them to the province, but it will be up to the province to determine if they will accept those questions or if they want them worded slightly different.
That's what I was looking for. Thank you. So questions, floor is open. Okay, I got two. First Rick, then Ron.
Yeah, man, I just want to clarify. I mean, it sort of almost appeared that way when the question about who's eligible was answered. But if there's two people living in a residence or two on the property, I'm assuming they both get a vote.
So I will take I'll describe a family. We have a couple, and we might have an adult offspring, and we might have a boarder. So if each of those four people meet the qualifications listed here, if they're 18 years of age or older, if they're a Canadian citizen, if they've lived in BC for 6 months, and this is their main address, they are entitled to vote.
Sorry, can I just ask a question about that? Would the voters not have to be on title?
No, this is this. I appreciate why someone might think that. The qualifications to be elector are this. It's the same piece of legislation that is used during general local elections. That is not an RDOS decision. That is provincial legislation in the Local Government Act. That's beyond our control. We don't have any say. It doesn't matter what we think of that. If you meet
For 18-year-old or 19-year-old, each get five kids, and like that's crazy.
So, as I said, regardless of what I may think of these qualifications, this is outlined in provincial legislation, and this is what we must abide by. So if you meet any adult that meets these qualifications, all of these is entitled to vote. Now, if they don't live there, they own property, then we would, so they don't qualify as resident elector, we then move on to the next one, which is the non-resident property elector. But if you are a renter, if you're a boarder, you're living long-term with a friend, you reside in the area and you're entitled to, just like when you vote for your local electoral area directors, it's the same qualifications.
So that's a flaw that I don't know how to go back and give feedback about that, because people are paying or people are not paying for this.
As I said, that is beyond our control.
Or changing that.
So this is provincial legislation, which would mean that if you wish to have a discussion with someone who's in a position to do something about it, you may wish to consult your MLA. But for this process, this is the legislation as it is right now.
Okay. I don't think you're going to go far. Ron, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And I have a question of clarification, and I'm looking for an answer from the CAO and from Ms. Graham. First part of the question is on the bylaw on borrowing. My understanding is that the amount could be quite high, but that doesn't mean that the amount that's going to be borrowed or paid is just to give the RDOS the necessary authority should they need to borrow up to that amount. So the amount could be quite high. And the second part of the question is I would expect and assume fiscal responsibility by the board and by staff always to bring these services into good operation at the lowest best value for dollar for the community. There's a lot of concern that things that are being suggested are perhaps not necessary or the prices are unduly inflated. I'll sit down and listen to your answers. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to invite Jillian first, but I think we may also want our CAO to respond to that.
Yeah, so first of all, that very good point. And that is that the loan authorization bylaw is the maximum amount that the regional district can borrow for each project. It is not it's not a given that we're going to borrow that, and it's not all in 1 year. But we're getting the area of finance, and that's not my area of expertise.
Thank you. So I was the finance guy, so I know what I'm talking about. In the referendum, we will always give you the worst case scenario. Doesn't mean we're going to borrow. As Jillian stated, it's the maximum amount. And as far as efficiency and getting good quality and the best price, we now have a purchasing manager on staff, which we only had for just less than a year now. Our purchasing policy was updated by the board, where we do a RFP for all major projects. So you look at the quality, the best price, etc., and the board would go back to the board and they would rubber stamp it, or they would ask questions and they get to see all the bids and lowest price qualified bidder. But as far as when you see the numbers that you saw up there, they look high. We would borrow over 15, 20, 30 years. The interest rate is locked in for 10 years. And every 10 years, whatever the current interest rate is at the time, will then be adjusted. Right now, as you know, interest rates started high, but they are going low. And we have the ability to borrow at the prime rate because we are government.
So in this process earlier on, we talked about granting, provincial granting. So how does that factor into this? Because right now we're carrying potentially the whole load. So how does provincial granting subsidize some of that cost?
So we aggressively go after grants as they come up. We give you the number before the grant. We can't deduct anything in there because it's not for certain. So when I say worst case scenario, it is worst case. As we get the grants, that number drops. And we can actually start telling the government that we are interested in taking over the two services and put the government on notice that we want the grants. And for OK Falls, we were successful in that before we took it over. The water system in OK Falls did receive a grant. So where we said we need X amount of money, it was X less the grant. I could hum while I'm waiting for the next question, but you're not going to like it. Yeah, well, Jillian, just a reminder, we don't qualify the grant. We can get it contingent on taking over the system. So we could on contingent on getting it over. Otherwise, we won't get it. So if you vote no, somebody else will get it. They'll just give it to another utility.
Okay, so we got more questions?
Maybe I'm out of the loop, but I'm just curious about how much we're paying for the assets and who is negotiating any price that we are paying.
Go ahead, Dave.
I was one of the key negotiators. We're paying a whopping $1 each for sewer and the water. Try to get it for less, but
Just a comment on that as well. We're buying the assets. So we're not buying the company, we're not buying the provider, we're just buying the assets, the pipe in the ground, the accounts, etc.
And with that, that does include any reserves that should be part of it. And we're aggressively going after whatever reserves that should go with the assets, that is an asset of the organization. And my background is a CPA. So one of the first things I did when we started negotiating is look at their financial statements. And so I have an idea what a utility should have in assets to keep up. It's not what it should be, but there should be some money there, and we're aggressively going after it.
Can you continue to apply for grants after the assets have been acquired?
That's when we have that's the only time we're going to actually get it. We can apply before, but we're not going to get any money until after. We've got just so that everyone knows, we've got 10 water services that we take care of. And we aggressively go after the grants as they come up. And right now, along with these two, we're also looking at Sage Mesa. And Sage Mesa took over 15 years to get to the stage where we're taking it over with negotiations and the province.
Okay, one other question is that maybe following on from a friend down there. He mentioned that some people feel that there may be some aspects of the system that don't necessarily have to be in at the time of initial inception of the system. And one of those, from my experience of talking to some neighbors, is, for example, water meters, which cost quite a bit of money, about 500,000 if I recall from that, which to me would seem not necessary to do to be able to provide the water services to everybody. So are you looking at cutting out certain portions so that you can keep the cost down at least initially for only the things that are required to provide the good quality water services?
Well, the board's looking at policies for water meters, and your system, if we take it over, can't be an exception. But I'd have Alan talk about that. He would know more. I know about the other water systems. And by the way, we're looking at grants for the water systems, for the water meters. And I believe we've been successful in some cases.
I would just add that the province, when they provide grant funding, ultimately they want to ensure that the assets are being managed responsibly. So one of the key requirements they have now when you're applying for grant funding is water meters, because of course water meters encourage conservation, and billing based on consumption is the responsible approach to managing water supply. So it's one of the conditions in most of the grant applications.
Thank you.
Regarding the vote, is it 50% plus one of those votes or of those who are registered? Could you clarify that, please?
I can, but I'll give it to Ms. Brent.
It is the majority of the people that cast a ballot, which generally is 50% plus one of those who vote. So if I understand your question correctly, I understand it to be that because there's two votes here, do they both have to pass for us to consider that we're moving forward? They're two separate utilities. It's two separate voting. The service areas happen to overlap, and so they happen to be some of the same voters. One can pass and one can fail. The one that passes, we would most likely move forward. The one that fails, we will not move forward. It's possible to do one without the other.
Well, my understanding is that as part of the negotiations with Lakeshore Waterworks, that if one vote fails, then the whole transaction falls apart. Is that correct?
So what Jillian stated is you can vote yes for one and no for the other. That's correct. But the agreement that we reached with the owner is that they both have to pass. So if one doesn't pass, then if sewer is a yes and the water is a no, it's a no.
In the worst possible world, the vote is no across the board. Then what?
If vote is no across the board, it stays status quo.
Yeah, but that's why we're in this.
That's right. But you have the chance and you have the right to, the vote can change that. So the power is in the property owners. You are the clients, and the clients get to choose. And if you choose no, you're choosing to stay with the current owner.
And I just, excuse me one second.
Yeah.
And we do have a bit of a line going here.
So my
No,
question.
actually, can I just get you to wait?
Oh, he told me. Sorry. Yeah.
I just want to add on that. We have a policy at the RDOS, And the whole thing is that it's your chance now. This is your vote, okay? I want you to understand that there is another policy as well that says we don't, the board, the organization, wouldn't look at this again for another 5 years. Now, I mean, is it going to be 4 years and maybe we get it through the door? I don't know. But my point is, if you decide to do it again next year, we're going to be waiting for a while. Okay, so I just want to be clear on that. Okay, who's next?
George Trachov.
Hello, George.
Hi, Jim. Just once again, flog a dead horse. How many people here are from Lakeshore Highlands? Can you raise your hand? Lakeshore Highlands, many people are saying, where is Lakeshore Highlands? We're the beginning of the place when we had a good water system before everybody built above us. We're the originals in that area. And the water system was originally built. In fact, I sat on the board of the water system when it was by the provincial government. And the system was originally built for the number of homes that were there. Then it expanded. There was an extra reservoir put up above, but that was about it. The reservoir, not any more upgrades to the system. Then it was the provincial government gave it back to private operators, and here's where we end up from there. But anyway, the point I want to make once again is not many people from Lakeshore Highlands know what's going on. And even though there was a last meeting, as you just heard, who are Lakeshore Highlands? There was a meeting held by the Vintage Views Heritage Hills Homeowners Association, who even myself, many of us didn't even know about. So many people sitting in Lakeshore Highlands don't even know what's happening. They don't know the cost. They don't know what's going on. And you want them to go out and vote. How can you vote on something blindly? So many of them will not come out. So my question basically is, will they be informed by mail and also send something saying what they're going to be voting on? What is it? What are the parameters? How much is it going to cost? So they know. And I'm sure many of them will vote for it because we all want a better water system, but they should be made aware of what's going on. And so far they've been basically shut out, kept in the dark.
Yeah. If Lakeshore Highlands had or has a group that we could work with, we'd love to, okay? So, I mean, there is the Heritage Hills group. They have come to the RDOS and asked to communicate with them and through them, etc. We would work with another group representing Lakeshore Highlands as well. So if you can provide those names, please. Okay, I hear you, George. Ms. Cram, do you have anything on that? Well, I'm not sure that we do actually at RDOS, but.
At this time, we don't have direct mail planned, and we don't have door-to-door notification planned. I can tell you that we have 6 weeks worth of statutory advertising that will happen leading up to this event, and that's a statutory part of it, as well as regional connections and social media and Voyant Alert.
So what you're saying is that not to worry about what you do take over giving bills because you don't have the records.
I don't think I said anything about addresses, but we are not planning a direct mail notification of this. For one thing, it's very expensive. Well,
Okay, so, all right, I hear what you're saying. You want additional communication to Lakeshore Highlands. So let us think about that and we'll see what we can do.
Okay, that last gentleman said that he was one of the original homeowners and the water system was built and was good and the water was fine and the province looked after it. Now, the engineers obviously designed that. It met the standard of the day. and it was good. And then that housing estate expanded. And every time it expanded and that water system was put in, engineers had to draw up plans. Permits had to be taken. Engineering plans had to be approved. Money was spent on permits, and it was approved. And yet you're asking us now to bring it up to today's RDOS standards. So my question is, did that water system meet provincial standards, federal standards, municipal standards, when the engineers drew their plans up, paid for those permits, paid for the development of that, and installed it? And was it inspected?
I don't have the answer. I'm an elected director, so I'm going to toss this one to our engineer.
Yes, thank you for the question. So to clarify, these are RDOS standards. These are provincial and federal standards. Of course, information changes over the years, standards change. We understand health better. The requirements for drinking water are significantly higher now than what they were 20 years ago. Treatment is one of the biggest costs associated with the water utility, and treatment for this system will have to happen in one form or another, whether it's the RDOS or if it remains as is, the province will push for that to happen. So this isn't RDOS dictating these standards.
But you're asking us to pay for this. The same as the water meters are going to cost $600,000, which we don't want, but you're asking us to pay for it, and you're saying, oh, it's provincial standards now because they want to look after the water and make sure we don't have a leaky faucet. The water is free. It's a commodity that comes out of the lake that's free. The only cost is to filter it, cleanse it, and make sure it's safe to drink. And I'm really opposed to putting water meters up.
So
cost.
There is another cost, and that's the infrastructure that goes with it. You're stating that it meets the standards. Well, the day that water service, utility service was installed, it's brand new, or it has to be maintained. And over the years, if it's not maintained properly, it's going to cost, and there's a catch-up cost. It's very rare that any utilities comes to the regional district and asks, take us over, until they're at a point where it doesn't make it viable for them to continue operating the system. So we had independent engineers do the study.
Yes, at $100,000. I read the engineer's report. They said the ductile steel that is now has gone past its age. It was put in the 50s, I think. Well, ductile steel lasts 125 years, and I've taken ductile steel out of the ground that was still good, that was over 100 years old. The engineers said the velocity of that water is high, and so that must mean the pipes are failing. No, it doesn't. It means that we built an estate all the way up that mountain, and we never replaced those pipes with larger pipes to supply those houses going up the mountain. Who's responsible for that? Are we responsible, or is the province, the permits, the engineers? Because I feel that you're asking us to take full responsibility and pay for everything, yet we're not the ones that are really responsible for that. I know when I was a contractor, I had to have, I think it was a $3 million bond. So if I didn't do my job, then the inspection department that brought on my bond to do the job properly. I know engineers I worked with had millions and millions of dollars in bonds. So if they screwed up, then you would go after the bond to bring the system up to the standard that they did not meet. And I'm sure that water system met the standard of the day. And then generally you grandfather that system and you try to bring it up all the time, which is why we pay water bills and a set a part of that and then grants to bring it up. But you're asking us to pay the whole thing.
So you stated you're paying water bills. When the 10 utilities that we own do the same, they pay water bills.
Yeah.
we ensure that a portion of those bills go into reserves. So, and those reserves are to pay for future upgrades. Has that been happening? Can you tell us if that's been happening to your water system? Okay, so that creates an issue. And the issue is you now have to pay for an upgrades that should have happened. If they happen on a regular basis, this wouldn't be happening.
Another question, did the province have the right to sell that water system to a private person? Is that not the provincial's responsibility? I mean, water is number one. You can't live without water, right?
The province has ultimate power. We're one of the local governments, municipalities and regional districts. We're essentially a department of the province. The province says jump, we say oh hi. So it's a private water system. The regional district of the day did not have any authority over that private water system.
But it was a provincial system.
So, no, it's good, and it was verging on discussion, so I appreciate that you left the mic for someone else. I think something to keep in mind, folks. We've had a third-party assessment look at work that needs to be done. Their opinion is true whether it stays with the current owner or whether it stays with RDOS. Now, yeah, I mean, when we get right into it, maybe we'll find we don't need this or we don't need that. We've said we're going to take the most efficient path required, the most efficient path available to get to the provincial standards. But that's got to happen whether you stay with your current operator or whether you stay with us. You have to decide that. Do you want to stay with the current operator or do you want to move to the regional district? There are built-in inducements, if you want, that would drive you towards having it delivered through a local government. One of which is the big one, is that you're able to access grants. And you simply are not able to do that under your existing system. There are pros and cons to being a private operator or with local government, and this is your chance. This is what you get to look at and think of, okay? You can have it run by a government system that runs a dozen other systems as well, and you have access to grants. There's going to be a chunk of work that needs to be done. Or you can stay where you're at. You're not going to have access to grants. You have a private operator who is responsible just for those services. It's your call, okay? And you're going to live with it. You're going to pay for it. And regardless, you're going to have a chunk of work that needs to be done, either with the private operator or with the regional government. And sorry, the other point I didn't mention, and Jim did touch on it, is just interest rates. What are we borrowing at now? 4.9 on commercial money. But we're not talking residential homes here. It's a different market altogether. You can add 2 or 3%. So, you know, your private operator has to borrow money to do some of this work. He's not going to be getting 4.9. Okay. So again, the answer is whatever's right for you. Okay. That's your call. We're just saying this is what we can do, and these are the terms, and this is how we work. So, Mr. Hedges.
So, Jim, I take exception to you trying to paint a narrative that it's lack of money put into RRTF. Please let me finish. Now, that system's been in place for over 50 years. I've been involved for 12 of those years. When I took it over, talking about the water right now, there was no replacement reserve. There was no contingency money at all in the system. It was $38 a month for water service. It was too low. It's been that way for many years. And of course, none of us want to pay more for water fees. Over the years, we've made a number of improvements. We do have some contingency money in there. And in 2019, 7 years after I took over the system, and we'd spent quite a few dollars trying to upgrade the system, as standards keep changing, there's increased costs. They want to drive more costs towards not just our system, every system in the province. Private ownership isn't really favored. We can't get low interest loans. We have no access to grant money. We don't take economy of scale when it comes to workers. But one of the biggest factors is as they change standards, there's fines that can come along with them. The government does not, the RDOS and municipalities don't face the same fines that a private operator does. I'm not saying this is all bad stuff. If it's all going to go to public utilities, that's fine. But it is not an even playing field, not even close to an even playing field between private ownership and public ownership. So please don't paint it like picture that there's been some inappropriate action on our part. Second part of all of this, we're working towards making this happen. I've been a willing participant to turn the utilities over since 2016. We've gone back and forth with a number of different things. Ecora did a reasonable job on the report. Do I agree with all the numbers? Absolutely not. I don't. Do I understand there's a negotiating factor in there? I do. When this system does get turned over, I do think it's in the best interest of the community and myself for it to go to a public utility. Borrowing money will be easier. Having access to grants will help. Not being, as they change the standards, not being non-compliant and facing fines will make a difference. But please remember, in 12 years, that system's come a long way. There is some contingency money there. We had a rate increase in 2019 that was going to go to more RRTS. 2020 happened, and I think everybody knows government and everybody was shut down with COVID. We have over $200,000 owed to us from ratepayers who were struggling through 2020 and 21 and part of 22. So there's been some changes and some things that have been happening in the progression of where we were going. It's very important that we understand we're all working towards the same end game here, making it the best for the people in the community. Thank you.
Just want to comment on your reserves. You're not the only water service that doesn't meet the required reserves. As we take over services, we know that the reserves aren't adequate. So it's not something that is something that you did wrong. I recognize that. As far as we have stated, we have 10 water services. Do all of them have the reserves that I want to have? No, but we're going there. It takes time. And one of the things that the board just passed something called the revenue policy, and the revenue policy is mandatory for cities, not mandatory for regional districts. We brought it in, the board accepted it, and one of the things that we can do as per your water utilities is we can actually have the user of today pay, user of tomorrow pay, or a combination of both. And what that means is the user of tomorrow pays, that means partially borrowing or all borrowing. Why? Because the reserves aren't adequate. So you're not the only one that I'm saying is not adequate for reserves. If you're adequate for reserves, we wouldn't have to borrow, and we wouldn't have to borrow for any of our 10 utilities. So I just want to straighten that out.
I don't know how much money you think could go into reserves based on 321, but this $19 million, that's a projected cost. There's no private system that's going to be anywhere close to that. And even with a lot of grant money, it's going to be very difficult. I know that's worst case scenario, and I get that part, but no reserves are covering that cost.
And I agree with you. Government utilities are better off than private and also irrigation districts who have water utilities. And one of the punishments for private utilities is the government does not give you grants. And why? Because they want provincial government wants us, local government and municipalities, to take over. When I came from West Kelowna, and so did Alan, just so everybody knows, we took over, when I was there, 5 utilities, and only 2 of the 5 had adequate reserves. And now they're doing great.
Let's take Kay and then Rick and then the next.
With respect to the water meters, I'm going to ask
question, if I may. If I understood you correctly, you indicated that water metering was a condition of grant applications. My question is it an option to defer the installation of the meters? When I'm doing the rough math in my head, we're looking at bringing up the system to compliance. So to pay for the loan, that will happen. And we also have to pay for our water. And right now that's without metering. Now I'm concerned about, first of all, the cost, as I suspect many people here are. But an additional concern, because we have just over an acre. And right now I water a portion of our bank to keep the risk of fire down. If people in similar situations are now going to be paying for that water to help the community keep fire risk down, I can see increased risk for fire. And that's something that perhaps needs to be considered in this.
I'm not sure that's a question so much as a comment. And I got to that point.
Can it be
Oh, can we defer it? Okay, I'll look to Alan and then I'll look to Jim.
So installation of the water meters would be, so if RDOS takes over the system, obviously we would revisit all the identified projects. We'd have to prioritize. So we're not saying that water meters would happen immediately. We'd have to see where that fits with the overall scheme. Although applying for grant funding to say we're going to install meters in year 5 or something like that, I don't think it's either are you metering or are you not? And that's only one of the questions. There's many qualifications when you apply for this grant funding. So if RDOS takes over the system, we would have to, again, look at prioritizing and look at strategically what's the best way to lay out this capital plan, considering that we are going to be applying for grants and what gives us the best chance to apply for those grants or to be successful. I do feel I should mention that I don't want to, like these grants are very well subscribed and they're not easy to get. So I don't want to leave any false assurances that these grants are given, because they absolutely aren't given. So.
Just one thing I think is important for you to know is you see the numbers up there and I want everybody to keep it up there. The rate's not going to go up overnight. We're going to be very conservative with the rates. If you do vote yes for both systems, as we spend it from year to year, the rates slowly go up. So I've done that in another municipality. So it may, if that's a 5-year project, then the rates will take 5 years. If it's a 10-year, it'll take 10 years to get to that rate. So it's not an automatic hit next year.
And I know that residents in the community have been asking and will work with you as time goes on between now and the vote to get some kind of a graphic so that people can understand how your total borrowing for this service goes up. And that's what drives your rate up over time. Okay, go ahead.
I think everybody in the community wants one thing, which is better water. So my question is it necessary to vote? Because I feel like this is turning into a vote on whether people want water meters or not. And I feel like that's not going the right way.
Yes. Thank you. Rick? And then you.
I just wanted to quickly address the matter that's been brought up about Lakeshore, Highlands, and Vintage Views. It almost sounds like making them into separate communities. I'm a former director on the community association. I don't even know if that's what we call it. It's changed the name. It's just a bunch of people who work together and try to do things for the community as a whole. I first became aware that there was an issue with the sewer back in 2019 when the septic field failed, and went down there and met with Mr. Hanches and a couple of the developers that were still building up where I live now, and found out a lot about it. Over the years, the association has worked with former Director Oberick, with Director Taylor now, with former MLA Rolly Russell, to try and get us to this point with a vote. One of the main things that happened, and this is probably 2 years ago, I can't remember exactly when it was, Director Oberick mentioned that there were two ways of getting the attention of the government or getting a vote on this thing. And one of them, can't remember what it's called, it's not the Assent vote, it's under the Local Governments Act anyhow. So what we did, it was a petition protest. And what we did as an association was we decided we would have an informal petition. Okay, and that's about 2 years ago. It was in the early fall, maybe early October. We got together a very significant group of folk from all over the community, up the top, right down to the bottom, who were interested and engaged. And we split the area into different blocks, and we had people go door to door with information pamphlets, and that included down in Lakeshore Highlands, and knock on doors and hand out information type pamphlets and ask them if they were in favor of voting to take a request to RDOS to look at the sewer and water systems. Not knowing how many people there were, we estimated there was about 300 property owners. There's actually more than that. I think there's 320 or so. But we went door to door. Not everybody was home. But we kind of kept track of how many people we talked to and what we found when we got there and gave them information and talked to them. And we actually ended up with about 60, just over 60% of the people in the entire, from Apple Court at the top right down to East Side Road, about 60% that we actually spoke to. And the vote on the informal petition, which we then took to the board later, was almost 100% of the 60% we spoke with. Okay, so it's not like we did not try to go to every resident we possibly could. It's really difficult. It's really difficult for RDOS. They don't have addresses for everyone. I don't, you know, those are probably in the office with the Waterworks and the sewer people, but it's a very difficult thing to do. A lot of people put a lot of work into it. A lot of citizens and community members that were worried and concerned about this. So I really do not like this Lakeshore Highlands versus Vintage Views thing. It grates on me.
Okay. Next question. Thanks very much, Rick.
I'm just trying to do the math here. So we're looking at, say, 13 million for Lakeshore Waterworks, and we're talking about 321 connections. That's about $42,000 per household. And then there was mention of about $1,200 in operating per year. So what are we actually looking at per household?
Okay.
And I also have a question about the amount of construction we're going to live with for the next 5 years too.
Alan, do you want to talk to that? Can you talk to that? We've got all kinds of RDOS people here. Okay, we have a Deputy Chief Financial Officer, Wayne Naking.
So for Lakeshore Waterworks, sorry, it's pretty loud. The plan was $13.5 million for capital. What that works out to is $921,000 payment a year for 30 years. And that works out to about $2,900 per parcel. So that's $321 houses would have to pay $2,900 a year. That's just for the capital, then your water would be charged on top of that. For the vintage used sewer, it's $6.9 million, which is $473,000 about for 30 years. That works out to $4,308 per parcel with 110 parcels. And then your sewer is on top of that.
Thanks very much, Wayne. Thanks for bringing your deputy. Go ahead.
The numbers that you just quoted are pretty scary to a lot of people. And what I'm worried about, I'd like to see it go through. But I'd like somebody to answer, and maybe Mr. Hanches is here, you can speak to this as well if you don't mind, is what happens if the vote doesn't go through and Mr. Hanches is left with the system and now he's got to bring it up to speed with all the provincial regulations and everything? Does he get fined to death throughout the whole thing? Are you going to squeeze him out? In which case you're going to have to take it over somehow yourself anyway. How is that all going to work out?
Okay. Yeah, I want to be clear. This is an RDOS session and I'm not trying to, so we're here to talk about what happens if you go with the RDOS approach. If you want to, I don't want to put Johnny on the spot. Sorry. In terms of trying to answer those kind of questions. All right. Briefly.
So standards are changing. Costs are going up. It's happening to everybody. And municipalities, private, public, they all are getting affected. Municipal or public systems have some coping mechanisms that are much easier for them to get through. Private systems, one of the biggest problems is, especially vintage views, a sewer system is a really good example. The cost up there for 110 homes is quite scary for the new and improved standards, not to mention the stuff in the past that was already difficult to deal with. I never built either one of these systems. I took them over 12 years ago. There were some problems with vintage views. There's a power line that goes through the farmer's field. The effluent field is was under an orchard. This is when I took it over, and then I was told by Ministry of Environment, you can't have it there. It's like, well, okay, where are we going to put it? You don't just move it. It costs a lot of money to move it. But the irony of some of the stuff that the standards are changing, and then they decide that, okay, we're not keeping up. We're not doing it fast enough, so now you have a fine. In 2022, I was issued a $200,000 fine. And there was a lot of information going around, but we weren't doing our job properly. Things weren't being done the way they should be done. But quite honestly, that $200,000 fine, I had more people on staff in the previous 2 years through COVID. I had A&E Engineering was on staff. I had a qualified professional, Tony Friesen, on staff. I had 4 supervisors. This is all for the wastewater system. And at the end of 2 years of having all this staff on board, we were doing a repair at the time as well. We ended up with a $200,000 fine, and I was like, this is ridiculous. We're never going to be able to keep this up. We have 100 homeowners. So we got a little bit frustrated. And of course, we accelerated the idea of going to the RDOS. Now, the previous CAO, Bill Newell, was not interested at all. And to Jim Safino's credit, since he's become involved, he's very interested in helping it become public utility. And that is the only way these smaller systems are going to keep up with the new demands of Ministry of the Environment and climate change and interior health and BC Controller Water. You ask, if we vote no, where are we going to go? It's going to be a very difficult task. Being not in compliance as a private utility, they hand out the fines like they're coupons. And they have no regard for anything else. This is the way it's going to be. So We could have walked away 2 years ago. Here's the keys. See you later. We're not going to do that. I won't do that. I'm going to be in this community for a long time. This really is, it's significant in money, but it's not significant in the sense of the overall plan in our lives. We're going to make this right. Somehow it's going to work out. Hopefully this Assent process comes to fruition and we make it work. It's going to be expensive. Our best bet is grant money. Our best bet is low interest loan. Our best bet is proper financial management, and we cut those numbers in half, which I really believe can happen. That's the only way this works. Staying private, I can tell you right now, and I know it's partially pushed private into public. They have a foot on the throat and they're not letting up. And that's a simple, short story.
Okay.
I hope that helps.
Thanks, John. And I want to be clear here. We're not trying to compare the RDOS system with Johnny's system. That's up for you guys to do. We're here to present, this is how it would be done if RDOS took it over. Okay. I'd also like to just make a comment. This process actually formally started in 2022. And really it has gone, I would say, probably at light speed. If you look at how conversion of other systems have gone, this is going quite rapidly. Sage Mesa has taken 15 years to get to where we're at. It got there with a certain amount of good faith. And yeah, it's been a negotiation all the way, but Jim has done a lot of negotiating. His predecessor, Bill Newell, has done a lot of negotiating. We've had great work done by the community, and we've had good work and compliance or cooperation with the existing service provider. So I just want to put that on the table there. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
I just have one comment, is that at the end of the day, where we are at, none of us are happy of how this has evolved.
Yeah.
But I think what is really important is that at this point in time, we have a couple of choices around, and I'm going to use a simple number. It's $1 million. It's $1 million to fix it. If we continue on and we do not take the opportunity to try and grant money, which is free money if we get it, instead of $1 million, maybe we are dividing up $750,000. Right now, our property value to try, I have a brand new home. I wasn't going to get in. I was halfway built my home, and they told me I wasn't going to get an occupancy permit because of this. Well, luckily I got in. But now I'm in a position, every single person here who has an asset in their home and in their property, this hanging over our head is not making our property an investment and sellable. So we need to fix it. And we are not going in the right direction if we don't take the opportunity to get compliance, good water, monitoring, and the opportunity for grants. So we can be upset and we can be angry because we're all frustrated about how we got here. But if you're looking at your long-term investment, having this hang over our head and it not be fixed, we are doing ourselves a disservice.
Can't say that better. Thank you. George?
My last comments of the night. I'd just like to first of all say thank you for looking into this and taking over. I'm sure we all want the same thing, whether we're in Heritage Hills, Lakeshore Highlands, Vintage Hills, Chartwell Place, we all want the same thing. But I'd also like to say, Johnny, I don't think this is completely on your shoulders with the system going down. I looked at the engineering reports, I looked at some other things, and I'd just like to, speaking over here before, go back in history a little bit and say, you know, I had the RDOS people say it's provincial law that looks after the sewage, provincial laws that look after the water. But we can't blame the provincial government. I wanted to put a new deck on the side of my house, but I couldn't get a permit for it because provincial law says I'm too close to the creek. But it's not the provincial government that issues the building permit for me to do it. It was regional district who told me I couldn't do it because of provincial law. Regional district, looking at the engineering reports, those systems have been behind for years. Well, my question is, and the finger I point at is the regional district. Because why did regional district give out building permits to add more buildings and more residences to systems that it couldn't hold? So the regional district should be hold the main responsibility for its system being the way it is, because they allowed other residents to be built. And then finally last year, they stopped doing that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question.
I would like to thank everybody involved with the regional district and Johnny and Ron Obrick as well for all of the work that has been put into this initiative. Just going back a few years, when I moved to Heritage Hills in 2001, the water system was privately owned, but it was operated by an independent board. And that was the provincial legislation at the time. So this water system was never provincially regulated, other than the independent board that ran it. And I think 2005, the legislation changed and the owner operators were allowed to take over their own water systems. So that's how this system has progressed. So we're in a current state where we've been on a boil water advisory for over a year. We've had an engineering study done that's outlined what the costs are going to be. Those costs are going to come to us regardless of whether it's the regional district running it or the current owner that still has management of the system. So I guess my question is, we're going to put this money out anyways. We're not in compliance with current regulations. So what are the timeframes that we have to bring it up to standard? And we're going to have to dig deep in our pockets to get that money anyways. So it seems pretty obvious to me that the right option is going with the regional district. So do you know what the timeframes are that we have to bring it up to the regulations currently for water?
I don't, and I'll look to Alan. I do know that a lot of it is about communication, and if we demonstrate that we are moving in that direction and we're making steps to get there, they're accepting of that. But I'll look to Alan if you want to add to that. And then I will say I'm seeing people leave, and I hate meetings that limp to a demise. So I'll take one more question after that, and then we'll stick around. We'll be available for questions if you want, and you've got our numbers. You can submit questions online, or you can submit questions by phone. We'll take as many questions as you like that way, but I'll draw it after this gentleman here. So,
you know, most people have a computer and everything out and they're trying to get in, but there's only a half dozen mailboxes, like section, and everybody has access to that. We not, but everybody gets junk mail. Give an envelope into every one of those boxes, and now just, you don't need the address. You just need one letter in there telling everybody when the vote is, and then going from there.
In the postal district for Lakeshore Highlands, Heritage Hills, there are only 144 mailboxes that will accept flyers. That I know from when we did the Fire Smart flyer mail out, and there are only 144 homes that will take flyers. So unfortunately, it doesn't work. Our friend suggested.
Okay, so we've had our one question. We'll go to Al.
Yeah, so the question regarding the timelines, Director Taylor's exactly right. My experience working with the province is they're willing to work with you if you're showing progress in your you're moving toward making progress on the ultimate goal as far as treatment goes and other requirements of the infrastructure. So as long as you're working with the province, they're willing to work with you. I haven't been actively involved to date in the process. As I mentioned, I'm about not quite 3 months in, but from reviewing the materials, I see about a 4-year capital program is what's been kind of drawn up here. That might be a bit ambitious from my experience, but obviously what I would say is if the RDOS takes it over, this is a priority for us, and we would do everything in our power to move it forward as quickly as we could, but as strategically as we could as well. So again, considering what grant opportunities change all the time. So we'd be in conversations with the provincial government. And, you know, if we knew that this grant was coming up in 3 months and maybe it makes sense to wait a little bit and get that application in, we'd take all those things into consideration. So I guess really what I'm just trying to summarize is that we would try to move forward the upgrades as quickly as possible, but also as feasibly as possible and as strategic as possible.
Okay, I'm told I should take 1 or 2 questions from online. Oh, there aren't any.
Well,
Be a lot easier if they can ask the questions after the fact.
Okay. So
Let's just continue doing this.
okay, we'll take one more.
Cool. How much money is available in grants?
That changed. Yeah. Oh, do you mean like, is it a 50-50 grant or?
Yeah, like.
That depends on the grant. That depends on the grant. Some grants might be 2/3 federal money, provincial money, and 1/3 yours, or 50-50.
That's significant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but you got to get it. And there are other people competing for it as well. Okay. For those online, I'm not going to take the questions now.
If they can ask the questions.
If you can send in your question by email, please do. We will get them answered. We have heard your comment about trying to reach out to non-residents and also people in Lakeshore Islands. We've heard that. And if you want to scan this QR code or just go to RDOS Regional Connections, and when you're there, look for the project titled Vintage Views Wastewater Lakeshore Waterworks. And there's all kinds of Q&A, engineering reports, PowerPoint presentation from the previous open house, etc. Again, I want to thank you very much for coming.